I never imagined my parents, the people who once framed my kindergarten finger painting like it was a masterpiece, would look me in the eye and choose my brother's business pitch over my son's safety. But they did. And 6 hours after I said no to a $30,000 loan, my 6-year-old was found crying alone in the lobby of a hotel he couldn't even spell the name of. No coat, no explanation, just a scribbled note in his backpack that read, "Maybe this will teach you." This isn't just a story about money, it's about the moment you realize blood can be colder than betrayal, about the day you stop asking how could they and start asking what now. My name is Olivia West. I said no to my brother's investment scheme, and my family responded by abandoning my child. Let me tell you how it all unraveled, starting with a text message that looked harmless, until it wasn't. It came on a Thursday, mid-afternoon. Rain was brushing the windows of my gallery cafe in Astoria, Oregon, that soft, persistent kind that turned sidewalks into silver sheets and made everything feel heavier. Inside, the place smelled like roasted espresso and cedarwood oil. My son, Rowan, was curled up near the reading nook with a stack of dinosaur books, his rain boots still puddled beneath him. That's when my phone buzzed. "Hey, need to talk. Urgent." It was from Daniel, my younger brother. He always skipped the greetings and went straight to the point when something was wrong, or when he needed something. And I knew, deep down, this wasn't just catching up. Daniel hadn't messaged me in over 3 months, not since the last time one of his ventures fell apart and he ghosted the entire family group chat. I didn't answer immediately. I just stared at those 4 words, a slow dread spreading through my chest. "Still," I replied, "meet me at the cafe, 3 p.m. He showed up 20 minutes late, of course, wearing a graphite gray coat over what looked like designer joggers and $200 sneakers, clothes that screamed money, even though he always insisted he was between projects. He walked in with his usual confidence, flashing a grin like we were best friends reunited. "Liv," he said, voice smooth, "place looks amazing. This is all you?" "It is," I said flatly, motioning to the chair across from me. "What's going on?" He didn't sit right away. He took his time, draping his coat carefully, checking his phone before sliding into the seat like he was prepping for a pitch. And he was. "I have something big," he started, leaning in. "A real opportunity. Liv, this one's different. Early-stage tech startup. Real estate meets crypto. Totally under the radar. I've got access to the founders. They're only letting 10 investors in." I didn't blink. I let him speak. "This is scalable," he went on. "You get in now, you're set. Triple your return in 6 months? I've already got my own money tied up in it, but to really make it work, I need an anchor investor. I trust you. I thought of you first." And then he said it. "I just need 30 grand. He said it like he was asking for a glass of water. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was familiar. We'd done this before, over smoothie bars, over resale sneaker apps, over a meditation podcast that never got past the 3rd episode. I reached for my coffee, then set it down. "Daniel," I said quietly, "I don't have 30 grand for this." "But you're doing fine," he argued, motioning around us. "You've got a thriving business. You were in Pacific Creators Monthly. I'm also a single mom with rent, payroll, insurance, and a child who deserves a future I can't afford to gamble." His jaw tightened. "So, you're just going to leave me out in the cold?" "I've supported you before. This isn't about cold. It's about boundaries." And that was the word he hated most. Boundaries. To Daniel, love without sacrifice was betrayal, and saying no was always a personal attack. "You think you're better than the rest of us now?" he said, standing. "No," I replied calmly. "I just finally learned that rescuing you doesn't help you. It just bankrupts me." He didn't respond. He grabbed his coat and walked out, muttering something under his breath that I didn't catch. At the time, I thought that was the end of it. I thought I'd drawn a line, and that, at worst, I'd get a few angry phone calls from my parents defending him. What I didn't know then was that the real fallout hadn't even begun. What I didn't know was that 6 hours later, Rowan wouldn't be at his after-school art program. He'd be sitting alone in the lobby of a hotel 6 miles away, waiting for a mother who never knew he was gone. The call came from Rowan's after-school program at 4:48 p.m. "Hi, Olivia, I just wanted to check. Did you decide to pick Rowan up early today?" I was reviewing invoices in the back office, rain streaking down the skylight above me, when the question landed like a blow to the chest. "No," I said quickly. "Why?" The pause on the other end was far too long. "Well, his bag and lunchbox are still here, but no one's seen him since third period." My heart kicked hard. "What do you mean no one's seen him?" "We assumed a family member picked him up. The sign-out sheet shows his grandfather." I was already grabbing my keys, already shaking as I dialed my father. No answer. Straight to voicemail. I tried my mother. Same result. I texted both. No response. I tried not to panic. I reminded myself these were his grandparents. Maybe they decided to surprise him. Maybe, though why they wouldn't tell me, I didn't know. I drove to their house, tires spitting water across wet asphalt, only to find the driveway empty and the lights off. I called again. I tried Daniel, just in case. Silence. My chest was tightening. The rain blurred everything around me. I checked the park, the waterfront, the diner we used to visit on birthdays. Nothing. Then, just after 6 p.m., my phone rang again. An unknown number. "Is this Olivia West?" a man asked, gentle but formal. "Yes, who's this?" "This is Derek, the front desk manager at the Clearwater Inn. I believe your son is here." I stopped breathing. "He's there? Is he okay?" "He's safe," Derek replied. "Someone dropped him off, said there was a family emergency. He's been here for about an hour. We gave him a snack and kept him warm, but he's been asking for you." I drove there in a blur of headlights and panic. I barely remembered parking, running through the rain, or explaining my name to the front desk. I just remember seeing him, my Rowan, sitting on a bench near the fireplace, clutching his backpack to his chest like it was the only thing in the world he had left. When his eyes met mine, he ran. "Mommy," he sobbed as he crashed into me. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to be bad. They said you didn't want me anymore." I dropped to my knees right there on the rug and held him, his little fingers digging into my jacket, his whole body shaking. "No, no, no," I whispered. "That's not true. I want you more than anything. That will never, ever change." A hotel staff member approached quietly and handed me the note they found in his backpack. Folded once, written in my mother's unmistakable script. "We hope this teaches you to remember where your loyalties should lie." My body went cold. Derek, the desk manager, had already called the police earlier out of concern. When they arrived, Officer Ramirez took our statements while his partner gently questioned Rowan. "Who brought you here?" she asked. "Grandma drove," he said quietly. "Grandpa helped with the seatbelt. Then they gave my bag to the hotel man and left." Officer Ramirez turned back to me, his expression grim. "This could fall under child abandonment, and if it was done to influence or punish you, that's coercive. This isn't just wrong. It's criminal." At home, Rowan wouldn't leave my side. He didn't want dinner, didn't want a bedtime story. He just wanted to know I wasn't going anywhere. "Can I sleep in your room tonight?" he asked. "Of course," I told him. "Every night if you want." He woke twice that night, crying out from nightmares he couldn't name. I held him through both. By morning, I wasn't just shaken, I was furious. I filed the full police report at 8:05 a.m. sharp. Then I called Jenna Lake, a family lawyer I had once met during a mural commission for her firm. She called me back by noon. "You have every right to press this," she said. "Your parents left a 6-year-old child at a hotel with a handwritten threat in his bag. This isn't about family anymore. This is about endangerment." I sent her the note, the texts, the hotel's video footage. Then I called my parents. No answer. I called Daniel, and he picked up. "Olivia," he said, calm as ever, "didn't think I'd hear from you this fast." I didn't waste time. You knew what they were going to do." His laugh was light. "They're just reminding you how family works." "By abandoning a child?" "You made them choose," he said flatly, "between helping their son and enabling their daughter's selfishness." I didn't make them choose, I said through clenched teeth. I asked them not to fund your scam. That's it. Well, he replied, now you know how it feels to be left out. My blood boiled. Hang up the phone, Daniel. And get a lawyer. I ended the call, and for the first time in years, I felt steady, clear. I was done being the fallback plan, and I wasn't going to let my son pay for my parents' loyalty to a lie. The footage confirmed what I already knew, but somehow, watching it broke me in a new way. 2 days after the hotel incident, I met attorney Jenna Lake at the Clearwater Inn to collect official copies of the video surveillance. The front desk manager, Derek, welcomed us both with quiet professionalism, but I could tell he remembered Rowan's face. He didn't say much, just nodded politely and guided us to the back office where the hotel's security recordings were stored. We watched the screen in silence as the grainy, black-and-white image flickered to life. There, at 5:37 p.m., my parents entered through the glass doors with Rowan between them. He was holding my mother's hand, looking up at her, his other hand clutching his tiny dinosaur print backpack. His raincoat was zipped all the way up. His hood covered part of his face. He looked calm, trusting. They walked straight to the counter. My father did the talking. My mother stood slightly behind, her hand still resting on Rowan's shoulder. Derek came into frame, smiling politely as he took the note they handed him. No emotion on my father's face, no hesitation, just the casual detachment of someone checking in a bag and walking away. At 5:42 p.m., they left. They didn't look back. Rowan remained seated quietly in the chair near the front desk. At one point, he opened his backpack and pulled out his drawing pad. He started sketching something. Dinosaurs, maybe. He waited. He believed they were coming back. The next time I saw myself on that screen, bursting into the lobby, crouching down to grab him, it felt surreal, like watching a movie I didn't want to be in. Jenna turned off the monitor and looked at me. I'm going to include this in our report to Child Protective Services and the DA's office. It will also support a protective order, should we pursue one. I nodded, the pressure in my chest thick and unrelenting. And they won't be able to spin this as a misunderstanding. Her voice was calm but firm. They dropped off a child without notifying his legal guardian, left a note with threatening implications, and never returned. That's not a misunderstanding. That's an intentional act, and the footage shows it plainly. I didn't respond. I just stared at the now black screen, still seeing Rowan's small figure sitting alone in the chair. Later that evening, after I picked up Rowan from school, he asked if he could draw something for the nice hotel man. I glanced at him in the rearview mirror. You mean Derek? He nodded. He gave me a cookie and said you were coming soon. I swallowed hard. You can absolutely draw something for him. Rowan tilted his head. Do you think Grandpa and Grandma will ever say sorry? I paused, fingers tightening around the wheel. I think some people only say sorry when they lose everything, and even then, they don't always mean it. He looked out the window and said nothing more. That night, after he fell asleep, I stayed up reading through every message my parents had sent me over the past year. I was looking for patterns, subtle warnings, signs that I had missed. What I found instead was a running theme: pressure, guilt, comparison, control. There was one thread in particular, from 6 months earlier, where my father had said something that now chilled me. It was after I refused to help Daniel with another business idea, a wellness retreat he'd been planning with borrowed images and fake testimonials. If you don't learn to support this family, Olivia, you'll leave us no choice. No choice. At the time, I had rolled my eyes, deleted the message, and moved on. Now it felt like foreshadowing. The next morning, I received a call from Detective Grant, the officer assigned to the child abandonment case. He'd interviewed the hotel staff, reviewed the footage, and obtained warrant approval for follow-up interviews with both of my parents. What happens if they refuse to talk? I asked him. They'll be summoned officially, and if they still ignore it, we can pursue charges with or without their cooperation. He was polite but honest. This will be slow. Family cases like this are delicate, but I promise we're taking it seriously. After I hung up, I walked to the kitchen window. The sky was low and gray again, the kind of sky that pressed in on you. I kept thinking about the way my mother's hand rested on Rowan's shoulder in the video. She hadn't pulled away like she was ashamed, she hadn't hesitated. That haunted me more than anything. 3 days later, I received an email from an unknown address. Subject line, "You deserve to know the truth." Attached were screenshots, dozens of them. At first, I didn't understand what I was looking at: group chats, email threads, transaction logs. But then I saw Daniel's name. The emails were between Daniel and a man named Zachary King, one of the alleged founders of the investment he had pitched to me. They discussed the scam in detail: tiered commission rates, investor targeting, language to use. Daniel had even written about our parents. They're old school but loyal. If I push the right buttons, I can get them to mortgage the house. Liv's more stubborn. I'll soften her through mom. Softening me through my own mother. Manipulating them with guilt. Using me as backup capital. He hadn't just lied to me, he had lied to all of us. The final message in the thread made my stomach flip. Got the parents halfway there. If I get the full 30 from Liv, I'll hit my quota and lock the bonus. If not, plan B, emotional leverage. I sat back in my chair, heart pounding. Emotional leverage. He meant Rowan. He meant this. Someone had sent these to me anonymously, but they didn't feel like fakes. Jenna reviewed the files that afternoon and confirmed their credibility. "These are enough to support an additional charge of conspiracy to commit fraud," she said, "and if your parents were unaware of the full nature of Daniel's scheme, they may be victims too, but right now, they're acting like accomplices." I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just felt the silence deepen. What stunned me more than the betrayal was how carefully it had all been built. That evening, while Rowan colored peacefully at the kitchen table, I stepped into the garage and closed the door. I stood there for a long time, staring at boxes labeled Christmas, Robert's Tools, Gallery Storage, trying to find the words. I had spent years telling myself that loyalty was a virtue, but now I knew it could be weaponized, and in the wrong hands, it could become cruelty wrapped in family branding. When I first became a mother, I never imagined I'd have to protect my son from the people who once rocked me to sleep. The words of Officer Ramirez from that night in the hotel lobby echoed in my head like a quiet drumbeat. If they're willing to leave your child in a public building without notifying you, what else might they be willing to do? I didn't want a custody case. I didn't want legal papers, restraining orders, supervised visits, or any of the other terms that had once seemed so foreign and far away from our lives. But want had nothing to do with it now, because my son had been left behind like a message, because love, without accountability, had become a weapon. And now, I wasn't fighting for fairness anymore. I was fighting for safety. Detective Grant called me in the following morning to review the compiled file, the same one that would soon be turned over to Child Protective Services and the district attorney. It included everything: the hotel footage, the front desk testimonies, the threatening note, the screenshots from Daniel's emails, and the new report Jenna had filed tying the conspiracy to financial coercion. I sat across from him in the cramped interview room at the Astoria precinct, fluorescent lights humming above us, the folder thick between us like a dam waiting to break. "Ms. West," he began carefully, "I've seen some complicated family disputes, but this isn't about family disagreement anymore. It's about consent, custody, and premeditated endangerment." He slid a copy of the report toward me. I hesitated. "What does this mean, exactly?" "It means," he said gently, "we're no longer just looking at this as an abandonment case. We're building toward potential charges for custodial interference and fraud. But that also means you may need to formally pursue legal clarification of guardianship boundaries to protect your son moving forward. In other words, I had to go to court, not just for justice, but for clarity. Because while I was Rowan's mother and sole legal guardian, the assumption of extended family goodwill had been shattered. When I got home that day, Rowan was on the floor with his toy dinosaurs, narrating a battle between a Triceratops and a T-Rex. He looked up when I entered, his face lighting up as if nothing in the world had shifted. But I knew better. I saw it in the way he flinched at loud noises. in how he now asked every night if we were safe. "Mom," he said, holding up one of his green crayon drawings, "I made a map of safe places. This one's home, this one's Alicia's house, this one's the cafe. No hotels?" I nodded, kneeling beside him. "That's a really good map, buddy." He pointed at the corner. "This spot is for people who lie." I swallowed. "Who lives there?" He frowned. "I don't know yet. Maybe Grandpa." I pulled him into my arms and held him close. There was no script for this, no guidebook, just instinct and love and the slow, quiet grind of choosing peace in the middle of chaos. Later that evening, Jenna arrived at my house. She brought a draft of the emergency custody protection motion and explained the steps. Filing it wouldn't change my parental rights, but it would legally establish that my parents had no visitation or contact rights with Rowan unless explicitly permitted. It also opened the door to requesting supervised interaction or revoking contact entirely depending on CPS review. "I know this feels formal," she said, "but it's not a punishment. It's a shield. You're building a wall where there used to be trust." I nodded. "And Daniel?" "He's a separate case. With the fraud investigation underway, he's already a person of interest. Once federal investigators finish reviewing the documents you received, they may pursue criminal charges." I wanted to feel relief. I wanted to believe it was enough. But all I felt was tired. Not defeated, just deeply, bone-deep tired. That night, I signed the paperwork while Rowan slept, his small frame curled beneath blankets patterned with stars and galaxies. I watched him for a long time, his chest rising and falling in that rhythm that children seem to have, a rhythm untouched by the weight of adult betrayal. I had promised myself I wouldn't let the world make him smaller, and I wasn't going to start now. The following week, we appeared before a family court judge for a preliminary hearing. The courtroom was understated, wood-paneled walls, pew-like benches, an air of forced civility that barely masked the tension crackling beneath the surface. My parents were there, seated side by side but without speaking. My mother wore a pale beige cardigan and a fixed expression. My father's jaw was tight, arms crossed. Daniel was not present. I didn't look at them as I took my seat next to Jenna. The judge, a woman in her 60s with sharp eyes and silver hair pulled back into a neat bun, read over the file with deliberate attention. When she looked up, her tone was calm but direct. "Ms. West," she began, "you're seeking an emergency protective order to prevent your parents from unsupervised contact with your son. Based on the documentation, this court finds your request appropriate and justified." My mother's eyes widened, but she said nothing. The judge continued. "Pending investigation by CPS and law enforcement, the following restrictions are now in place. No contact via phone, email, or in-person visits. No attempts at pickup or communication through intermediaries. Any violations will result in escalation to criminal contempt charges." I exhaled slowly. I hadn't realized how tightly I'd been holding my breath. The judge turned toward my parents. "You may respond to these claims through appropriate legal counsel, but let me be very clear. What I've read in this file does not describe a misunderstanding. It describes a violation of trust and safety that this court does not take lightly." Neither of them spoke. My mother looked at the floor. My father stared straight ahead. When it was over, I stepped out into the courthouse corridor and felt the weight of the legal system shift behind me like a door closing. It wasn't revenge. It wasn't even justice. It was protection, and it was long overdue. There was no shouting, no dramatic phone call, no tearful apology or explanation, just a small padded envelope dropped off at the front counter of the cafe I co-owned. No name on the outside, no note, just a key, a folded piece of paper, and silence. The barista had found it around 9 a.m. and handed it to me with a confused look. It was just sitting there when I opened, right next to the till. My name was scribbled on the folded paper in familiar cursive. Not my mother's this time, Daniel's. I knew his handwriting instantly, sharp angles, slight upward slant, like every letter had somewhere better to be. Inside, the note read, "Figured you'd want this back. Consider it symbolic. You got what you wanted. The family's yours now. Don't worry, I'll disappear soon enough. D. And there it was. The spare key to my parents' house. The one I'd had since I was 16. The one I used to let myself in during college weekends. The one they'd insisted I keep just in case. Holding it now, it felt radioactive. It wasn't the key itself that stung. It was the message beneath it. You're not welcome anymore. I stared at it for a long time. The note. The envelope. The weight of what had once been casual trust now turned cold and deliberate. Jenna, my lawyer, later confirmed it had no legal bearing. Symbolic, she agreed, but people often show their hand in subtle ways before they're forced to in court. And this? This was Daniel's way of washing his hands of me, of saying, we're done, but refusing to say it with the vulnerability of his own voice. The irony, of course, was that I had let go of the idea of being welcome in that house a long time ago. Maybe the key just made it official. I tucked it in a drawer I rarely opened and went back to work. But something shifted that day. Not dramatically, not like a wave crashing in, more like the tide pulling quietly, steadily, changing the shape of the shore before you even realize the landscape is different. At home that evening, Rowan was sitting on the kitchen floor with Alicia, assembling a volcano out of papier-mâché and craft paint. He looked up as I walked in, hands stained orange-red. "It's gonna erupt," he beamed. "Auntie Alicia says we can add baking soda tomorrow." I smiled. "That sounds amazing." Alicia stood up, brushing her jeans. "Everything okay?" I nodded, but I held up the envelope. She read the note, then met my eyes. "They're not just drawing a line, Liv," she said. "They're building a wall, one brick at a time." I exhaled, leaning against the counter. And every brick feels more permanent than the last. We stood there in the fading kitchen light, the scent of craft glue and dinner leftovers hanging in the air, the quiet ache of families severed without ceremony. It wasn't the fights that broke us. It was the silence afterward, the absence of trying. That night, I took Rowan on a walk through the neighborhood, just to get fresh air. It was cool and breezy. Early spring in Oregon always felt like the coast couldn't decide between winter and awakening. The cherry blossoms were blooming half-heartedly, scattered like pale confetti across the sidewalks. Rowan held my hand, skipping ahead at times, circling back to stomp on petals. "Do you think dinosaurs liked flowers?" he asked out of nowhere. "Probably," I said. "The big ones might have trampled them, but the little ones? I bet they loved them." He grinned, satisfied. We passed the edge of the park, and I noticed a woman I recognized, Susan Davenport, a longtime family friend, and my mom's old walking partner. She was out with her golden retriever, who barked excitedly at Rowan's presence. She gave me a tight smile. "Olivia." "Susan." There was a pause. "I heard about everything," she said delicately. "Of course. I just want you to know, I don't believe the version they're telling." I blinked. "What version is that?" She shifted uncomfortably. "That you made everything up. That you left Rowan alone at the cafe and they were trying to help. That you're blowing it all out of proportion because you've always had a complicated relationship with Daniel." I felt heat rise behind my eyes, not from anger but from exhaustion. "I have documentation, police reports, hotel footage, statements." "I know," she said quickly. "I believe you. I do. I just wanted you to know the stories are circulating." I nodded, numb. "Thanks." She looked like she wanted to say more. Then she glanced at Rowan and thought better of it. "Take care of yourself," she said gently, before walking away. And just like that, the truth felt like something I had to defend, again. That night I sat in bed reading the family group chat I'd been removed from. Someone had leaked screenshots to Alicia. It was filled with cold commentary. "She's overreacting. Daniel didn't mean harm. Rowan's too young to remember anyway. Olivia's always been dramatic." Not one message of concern for Rowan. Just defense, deflection, dismissal. It wasn't the betrayal that shocked me, it was the quiet approval of others, the way people excused behavior because it was easier than confronting it. That was the real fracture. Not the key in the envelope, not even the lies. It was the quiet nods in the background, the people who stood silently behind harm because silence cost them nothing. It started as a whisper, quiet, careful, and calculated. By the time it reached my Aunt Diane in Florida, the story had twisted into something barely recognizable. According to the new version, I had left Rowan alone at a cafe during a business call, and my parents had nobly stepped in to help. A misunderstanding. A misstep. Nothing more than an overwhelmed single mother and her saintly family. It wasn't just false, it was intentional. They were rewriting the story before the truth had a chance to settle. What hurt more than the lies was how effortlessly people seemed to believe them, how quickly old family friends and distant cousins accepted the version where I was unstable, emotionally erratic since Robert's death, and Daniel was the loyal son just trying to hold the family together. In this new narrative, I was a problem to manage, not a person to understand. And worst of all, Rowan was reduced to a footnote, an accessory in their tale of family hardship. I was sitting in Alicia's kitchen when she read me the latest message that had been forwarded to her from a mutual friend. It was a screenshot of a text sent by someone in my father's men's prayer group. Roger says Olivia's acting out again, says she's been spiraling since Robert died. They're worried she's not thinking clearly. The weight of hearing Robert's name used like that, spun into their defense, landed like a gut punch. Alicia placed her hand gently over mine as I sat in stunned silence. "They're not telling this story to make peace, Liv," she said. "They're telling it to protect themselves." I nodded slowly, unable to tear my eyes away from the screen. They're not just trying to survive this, they're trying to rewrite it. That night, after Rowan went to bed, I pulled out an old photo album I hadn't touched in years. It was the heavy leather one with the broken clasp, the one that used to sit on my parents' coffee table. Inside, I found a photo of myself at 8 years old, standing proudly next to a lemonade stand I had built from old crates and poster board. Daniel was in the background, sitting in a lawn chair, sipping from a cup, barely paying attention. The caption below, written in my mother's handwriting, read, "Our little entrepreneur." But the story had never been about me. Even then, the credit was shifted, the spotlight redirected. The pattern had always been there. I had just spent too long justifying it. The next morning, I dropped Rowan off at school and, on a strange impulse, drove to my childhood home. I didn't go to the door. I didn't plan to speak to anyone. I just parked across the street and watched. The house looked smaller than I remembered. The lawn hadn't been mowed in weeks, and the paint on the front porch was peeling. The curtains were drawn tight. It felt sealed off from the world, as if it had chosen to turn inward and shrink itself rather than face what it had done. I sat there for a long time, watching a house that no longer held my belonging. Later that afternoon, I booked a session with a trauma-informed therapist named Dr. Keller. She listened carefully as I gave her the abbreviated version of everything, the abandonment, the legal steps, the years of family favoritism that I had filed away and swallowed in silence. After a pause, she asked, "When was the first time you were told not to speak up about something that hurt you?" And the answer came faster than I expected. I was 11. Daniel had taken $20 from my desk to buy candy. I told our parents. My mother had sighed and said, "Maybe don't leave money out next time." Later that night, she pulled me aside and added, "Don't make a scene, Olivia. It's not worth the drama." That sentence had followed me like a shadow ever since. I had learned early that making peace mattered more than telling the truth. And for years, I complied. But now, I had a child watching me, and the cost of silence was no longer mine alone to carry. A few days later, I met with Aunt Helen at a quiet cafe near the marina. She was the only relative who had called, not to judge, not to defend anyone, but to say, "I believe you." Her presence felt like oxygen. We talked for nearly an hour. She told me stories I had never heard, how she too had been expected to prop up my father's mistakes, how when she had asked their parents for help covering a medical procedure, she'd been told to figure it out, while my father had been gifted $10,000 for a failed boat business the same year. The golden child dynamic isn't new, she said, stirring her coffee, but it thrives in families where no one dares to name it. And if you do? You become the villain. I sat back, absorbing the weight of that truth. I didn't set out to fight anyone, I said. I just wanted to protect my son. Helen smiled sadly. You didn't start a war, Olivia. You just stopped pretending there wasn't one. Later that evening, after Rowan was asleep and the house had settled into stillness, I sat at the kitchen table with a blank document open on my laptop. I started writing, not a legal brief, not a court declaration, but something quieter, deeper. A statement. Not for the judge, not for my parents, not even for Daniel. For me. And maybe, one day, for Rowan. A version of the story untouched by their spin or shame. A simple recounting of what happened, how I responded, and why. So that when he asked me questions in the years to come, I wouldn't have to rely on memory clouded by emotion. I would have my truth, in my words, already written. It didn't happen during the courtroom hearings, not when the documents were filed or when the police confirmed Daniel's involvement. It wasn't even the day I watched my childhood home through the windshield of my car, realizing it would never be mine again. What broke me came quietly, like most real grief does, and it came through my son. It started with a missing toothbrush. A Tuesday evening, uneventful in every other way. I had just finished cleaning up from dinner, the faint scent of garlic and rosemary still in the air. Rowan was upstairs brushing his teeth, or so I thought, while I packed his lunchbox for the next day. A gentle routine. Predictable. Safe. But when I came up to say goodnight, the bathroom light was on, and the sink was dry. No toothbrush. No Rowan. At first I didn't panic. He had probably wandered into his room, distracted by a toy or drawing, like kids do. But when I stepped into his room, the lights were off, and he wasn't there. Not in the closet. Not under the bed. Not behind the door. It took me less than 30 seconds to find him, but those seconds changed something in me. He was curled inside the hallway linen closet, the door slightly ajar, his knees pulled to his chest, hands covering his ears. When he saw me, he didn't flinch. He just whispered, "I thought you left." His voice wasn't dramatic or loud. It was resigned, small. I dropped to the floor instantly. No, baby, I'm right here. I would never leave you." He looked at me with eyes far older than 6. "But you said you'd come up, and you didn't. So I thought, maybe you were mad, or scared away." I wrapped my arms around him so tightly I could feel his heart beating through his back. "I'm never scared away from you, never mad in that way. I promise you." He didn't cry. That's what terrified me most. He just leaned into me, silent, breath shaking, as if his body remembered something it didn't have the language to say out loud. Later that night, after I coaxed him into bed and lay beside him until he fell asleep, I sat at the edge of my own mattress, staring into the dark. This wasn't about a toothbrush. It was about the night at the hotel, about being left, about not understanding why familiar faces had done something so unfamiliar. He had absorbed it, absorbed all of it, and turned it inward. I thought I'd been doing everything right. Therapy, safety planning, supervised routines, stability. But trauma doesn't follow instructions. It lingers in shadows, and it hides in closets with small boys who wait for footsteps that don't come. The next morning, I called Dr. Bennett, Rowan's child psychologist, and asked if we could come in early. He met us that afternoon. Rowan sat cross-legged on the plush carpet of his office, picking at a felt dinosaur while I spoke quietly with Dr. Bennett across the room. "This wasn't a tantrum," I said. "He wasn't testing boundaries. He believed I had left him." Dr. Bennett nodded. Because for him, abandonment isn't theoretical. It's something he has experienced. I swallowed. I thought we were past the worst of it. "Emotional recovery is rarely linear," he replied gently. "Children process in layers. When the initial fear fades, what's left is confusion. Questions they don't know how to ask." He paused. "Do you know what he said when I asked him about his safe places?" I shook my head. He said, "Mom's hugs are safe, but only if she remembers I'm there. I bit the inside of my cheek to keep from crying. He thinks I might forget him. He's not thinking it logically. He's feeling it residually. And feelings like that don't go away just because adults know better. That evening, I sat with Rowan on the back porch watching the sunset. We wrapped ourselves in a blanket and shared a bowl of sliced peaches. The air was cool, the sky streaked with lavender and gold. "Hey, buddy," I said gently. "Can I ask you something?" He nodded. "Last night, when you were hiding, what were you feeling?" He didn't answer right away. Then he whispered, "I thought if I disappeared, you'd stop looking. Like Grandpa and Grandma did." My chest cracked open. I turned toward him and cupped his face. "Rowan, listen to me. I will never stop looking for you. I will never forget about you. Not even for 1 second." His eyes searched mine for a long moment. "What if I do something bad?" "Even then," I said, "there's nothing you could do that would make me stop being your mom, or make me stop loving you." He leaned against me. "I miss Daddy." "I do too," I said, "every day." We didn't speak after that. We just watched the light fade across the lawn until the stars began to appear. Quiet. Together. That night, I sat in my room with the document I had started for Rowan, the one I had begun writing a few nights earlier, my story, in my words, untouched by gossip or spin. I didn't add any new paragraphs. I didn't edit what I'd already written. I just opened a new page and titled it, "For the Night You Hid in the Closet." Then I wrote about the toothbrush, the peaches, the sky. Not because I needed the record, but because someday, when Rowan is older, I want him to know. What broke me wasn't Daniel's scam. It wasn't my parents' silence. It wasn't even the betrayal of people I used to trust. What broke me was finding my child in a dark hallway, convinced I'd done the very thing I had spent every ounce of my energy trying not to become. The envelope looked innocent enough, no handwriting on the outside, no return address, just a pale blue rectangle nestled between bills and a community newsletter. I almost didn't notice it, almost tossed it aside with the credit card offers and dentist coupons, but something about the weight of it stopped me. It wasn't just a card. It felt heavier, measured. Inside was a single sheet of ivory stationery, thick, expensive, the kind my mother reserved for thank you notes and formal invitations. The scent of her lavender hand lotion clung to the paper. The cursive was unmistakable, neat, elegant, and weaponized with politeness. "Dear Olivia, we've had time to reflect on everything. Families go through storms. Sometimes emotions cloud judgment. We all said things we regret. What matters is love, and love always finds a way home." I paused. Already I could feel it, the subtle shift of blame toward the abstract. No names, no acknowledgement of actions, just emotions and storms, as if Rowan had misplaced a shoe and not been abandoned at a hotel by his own grandparents. I kept reading. "Your father and I are heartbroken. We never imagined things would come to this. We miss our grandson terribly. And we miss you. Daniel made mistakes, yes, but haven't we all? He's receiving help now, and we pray for healing and unity every day. We would like to meet, to talk, privately, as a family. We believe in forgiveness. We believe in fresh starts." There was no apology, no mention of the police report, the court order, the therapy bills, the closets Rowan hid in, and then came the last line. "We ask that you consider pausing the investigation for the sake of Rowan's future. Love, Mom. That was the clause, the condition, the price of peace. I stared at the final sentence until it blurred, not because I didn't understand it, but because I understood it too well. Forgiveness was being sold as a favor, and Rowan's safety was the bargaining chip. I folded the letter carefully and slid it back into the envelope, not angrily, not even sadly, just clearly. That was the part no one ever told you about healing, that sometimes the pain isn't what confuses you, it's the clarity that comes after. That night, I sat with Alicia on her patio. The air was cool and carried the faint scent of the neighbors' cherry blossoms. Rowan was inside, asleep in his sleeping bag next to her son's bed, surrounded by comic books and glow-in-the-dark stars. I handed her the letter. She read it twice. Then she said, "They still think this is about appearances." I nodded. They want a story with a clean ending, something they can control again. "What are you going to do?" I took a breath. "I'm going to respond, but not in the way they expect." The next morning, I sat at my desk and wrote a letter of my own. Not angry, not performative, just honest. "Dear Mom, thank you for your note. I agree. Families go through storms. But storms don't abandon children at hotels. Storms don't ask mothers to ignore court investigations for the sake of fresh starts. You asked for forgiveness, but forgiveness without accountability is just permission. I've spent the past 2 months picking up the pieces of a little boy's trust. He still flinches when someone knocks at the door. He still asks me every night if I'll remember him in the morning. That didn't happen because we had a disagreement. It happened because people he loved treated him like a consequence. I'm not pausing anything. Rowan's future deserves clarity, not secrets. If you ever want to be part of his life again, it will begin with one thing: truth. Not peace offerings, not poems about storms. Truth. Until then, Olivia. I didn't send it right away. I left it on the desk overnight, reread it the next day, and only then sealed it in an envelope with no return address. This time I knew it would be opened. This time I didn't care how it landed. Later that afternoon, I picked Rowan up from school. He was waiting at the gate with his backpack askew and a wide smile, holding a crumpled worksheet with a star sticker in the corner. "We learned about volcanoes today," he beamed. "Did you know they're just mountains that hold stuff in too long?" I blinked. The metaphor struck like lightning. I crouched beside him. "That's exactly right." He tilted his head. "Do people have volcanoes inside them too?" I nodded slowly. "Sometimes. That's why it's important to let things out before they explode." He seemed satisfied with the answer. "Then let's paint one tonight." So we did. That evening, we spread newspaper across the kitchen floor and used bright oranges and reds to paint fire pouring from a cardboard mountain. Rowan added blue sky and a tree with a swing at the base. "Because even when volcanoes explode," he said, "they can grow stuff after." I kissed the top of his head and whispered, "You're so much wiser than I ever was at your age." Later, I tucked him into bed and lingered a little longer than usual. I watched his lashes flutter as he drifted to sleep, peaceful, uninhibited by the weight of adult dynamics. But I knew, somewhere deep inside him, his volcano had already erupted once, and I wouldn't let anyone pull him back into the lava again. It happened in a grocery store parking lot of all places. No warning, no call ahead. Just a quiet Thursday afternoon in late spring, and the sharp click of a cane on concrete behind me. "Olivia!" I turned, keys halfway to the ignition, Rowan already buckled into his booster seat with a juice box and a half-open comic book. There, standing 3 parking spaces away, was my father. He looked smaller than I remembered. His slacks were too loose, his hair grayer than last month. But the eyes, still sharp, still scanning, landed on me like searchlights. "I don't want to cause a scene," he said, raising his hand slightly, like someone approaching a wounded animal. I didn't respond. 5 minutes, he added. "That's all I'm asking." I checked Rowan, who hadn't noticed yet, then slowly closed the passenger door. We stood near the back of my car, barely out of the sun. I didn't offer him a greeting. He didn't expect one. "I got your letter," he said, looking down at the pavement. "Your mother cried for 2 hours." "I'm sure," I said evenly. He looked up. "That's not sarcasm?" "No," I replied. "It's just not my responsibility anymore." There was a pause. A long one. I could feel his discomfort, but I didn't move to help him through it. "I came because I needed to say something," he said, "and it won't be poetic. It won't fix anything, but you need to hear it." I folded my arms. "I'm listening." He exhaled. "We failed you. Not just with Rowan. Not just this year. I mean, over and over. For decades." The words landed harder than I expected. He didn't say, "Mistakes were made." He said, "We failed you." For a moment, I wasn't standing in a parking lot. I was 16 again, walking out of a school play Daniel had forgotten to attend, only to hear my father say, "Well, he's not the actor type." I was 22, crying in a dorm stairwell because my parents hadn't come to my senior thesis presentation, and my mother had said, "Daniel's startup had an investor meeting, honey. That's family priority." And now, standing here, I was none of those ages, but I remembered all of them in an instant. I didn't speak. He went on. "When your mother and I had Daniel, it felt like a second chance. He was more fragile, needed more attention. We didn't realize we were drawing lines around you, telling you to be strong, to not need so much." "But I did need," I said, my voice low but steady. "You just didn't listen." "I know," he said quietly. And by the time we noticed, it was easier to keep the story going than admit we'd written it wrong. It was the most honest thing he'd said to me in years. Still, I asked, "And Rowan? What about him? Did you think he was part of that same story?" My father flinched. "No," he said. We thought we were teaching you a lesson." I stepped back. "So you used my child to punish me?" He didn't argue. He didn't try to twist it. "I know," he said, "and I don't expect forgiveness, but I wanted to look you in the eye and say it out loud, not for redemption, for truth." I stared at him, unsure if it was pain or disgust I felt more deeply. "You're not the villain in my story, Dad," I said after a moment, "but you're also not the hero, and I'm done rewriting people into roles they didn't earn." He nodded slowly, as if the weight of that truth settled somewhere behind his ribs. "I lost my father to ego," I added. "Don't make Rowan lose his grandfather to pride." His eyes flickered toward the car. "I'm not asking to see him," he said. "Not yet. I don't deserve that. I just wanted to say it out loud." For a second, I considered letting him speak to Rowan, but then I remembered the hotel lobby, the note in the backpack, the way Rowan's voice cracked when he asked, "Do you think they'll leave me again?" So I shook my head. "Not today." He accepted that without pushback, just nodded again. Before he turned to leave, he pulled something from his pocket. A photograph, crinkled at the edges. I recognized it instantly. Me and Daniel at ages 7 and 5, sitting on the porch with popsicles. It had once lived on the fridge for years before being quietly replaced by newer photos, ones where Daniel stood at center frame. "I keep this," he said, "because it's the last time I remember you both looking at me the same way, before we divided things." I didn't take the photo, but I didn't tell him to keep it either. He set it gently on the edge of the car's trunk and walked away, cane tapping rhythmically on the asphalt until the sound faded. I didn't cry. I didn't feel victory. I felt what I imagine tectonic plates must feel when they shift, an ache so deep it doesn't scream, it just rearranges. Later that night, Rowan and I read a new picture book on the couch about trees with rings inside them. "Did you know trees remember everything?" he asked. "Even storms?" I kissed his head. "They do, but they also keep growing." And somewhere inside me, a new ring formed. Not forgiveness, but growth, and the memory of a truth finally spoken aloud. For a second, I considered letting him speak to Rowan, but then I remembered the hotel lobby, the note in the backpack, the way Rowan's voice cracked when he asked, "Do you think they'll leave me again?" So I shook my head. "Not today." He accepted that without pushback, just nodded again. Before he turned to leave, he pulled something from his pocket. A photograph, crinkled at the edges. I recognized it instantly. Me and Daniel at ages 7 and 5, sitting on the porch with popsicles. It had once lived on the fridge for years before being quietly replaced by newer photos, ones where Daniel stood at center frame. "I keep this," he said, "because it's the last time I remember you both looking at me the same way, before we divided things." I didn't take the photo, but I didn't tell him to keep it either. He set it gently on the edge of the car's trunk and walked away, cane tapping rhythmically on the asphalt until the sound faded. I didn't cry. I didn't feel victory. I felt what I imagine tectonic plates must feel when they shift, an ache so deep it doesn't scream, it just rearranges. Later that night, Rowan and I read a new picture book on the couch about trees with rings inside them. "Did you know trees remember everything?" he asked. "Even storms?" I kissed his head. "They do, but they also keep growing." And somewhere inside me, a new ring formed. Not forgiveness, but growth, and the memory of a truth finally spoken aloud. 3 days after the dinner, I received a video link in my inbox. No subject line, no message, just a single URL from Daniel's assistant, Clara. I hesitated. Normally, I would have deleted it, but curiosity held my finger. When I clicked, it opened to a sleekly produced video of the launch dinner, the kind of promotional content meant for investors, golden hour lighting, drone shots of the estate, music swelling under polished smiles. It was Daniel, branded. I watched it with the sound off at first. I didn't need narration to understand the story they were trying to sell, a family united behind success. As if the fractures had healed, as if the broken glass beneath our table had never existed. But then, somewhere near the end, a familiar clip flickered across the screen. Daniel, at the microphone, toasting his family. "I wouldn't be here without the people who shaped me," he said. I turned the sound on. He cleared his throat, then continued. "And while we haven't always agreed, and some things have been painful, I want to say something on record." The crowd quieted in the video. I could see my mother watching him, unsure where he was going. "Olivia," Daniel said, and the camera shifted, catching my surprised expression. "You showed me something I didn't understand when I was younger. That dignity doesn't need a spotlight to be real. That raising a child alone is more heroic than anything I've ever pitched in a boardroom. I was wrong. About a lot." He paused. "And I hope this moment, even if it's just this one, helps us find a better way forward." I stared at the screen, my name, in his mouth, in public, not whispered, not denied. It should have meant something. It did. But not in the way he intended. Because while the apology was polished, visible, and dressed in good lighting, it still wasn't for me. It was for them. For optics. For the board, the backers, maybe even his own redemption arc. It was meant to clean a reputation, not repair a relationship. Rowan padded into the room halfway through and leaned on my arm. "Why are you crying?" he asked. I hadn't realized I was. I wiped my cheek, then ruffled his hair. "Because someone said sorry, but they didn't say it to me." He blinked. "Then it doesn't count." Out of the mouths of children. Later that evening, I took a walk, just around our neighborhood. We lived in a quiet part of the city now. Porch swings, evening joggers, the scent of someone grilling. I needed air, space, a reminder that my life was here now, not back at that estate. I passed Mrs. Ellison, our neighbor from across the street, watering her rose bushes. "That little boy of yours," she said warmly, "has the kindest manners. He offered to help me carry my groceries yesterday." "He's the best part of me," I smiled. She nodded, then said something that caught me off guard. "Whatever you're healing from, Olivia, I hope you know you're doing it beautifully." I thanked her, voice catching in my throat. There it was, validation without strings, kindness without performance. Back home, I sat with Rowan as he built a Lego spaceship, completely in his world. "Do you think people change?" I asked. He didn't look up. "I think they can, but mostly when they really want to, not when someone tells them to." That night, I wrote Daniel an email, not to thank him, not to encourage more PR apologies, but to close the loop. "Daniel, I saw the video. I heard your words. They were better than silence, but still a long walk from truth. If you ever want to talk, genuinely, not through microphones, you know where to find me. Not for your image, not for our parents, just for you, and for Rowan. Until then, I'm okay. We're okay. Olivia." I hit send, then turned off the laptop, picked up a book, and read with Rowan until he drifted off. In the quiet that followed, I sat on our balcony with a blanket and warm tea. No ambient music, no spinning thoughts, just stars and peace. Because sometimes healing doesn't come in grand gestures. Sometimes it arrives in small truths, whispered quietly to the self. Like, I didn't need the apology to move forward. I had already moved, and I was never going back. It wasn't supposed to be a day of revelation. It was just meant to be routine. I had picked Rowan up from school and stopped for groceries. I still had yogurt on my hand from where a container cracked in my bag when I got the call. Ms. West, this is Shelley Atwood from Harris, Daymore and Langston. I'm your father's estate attorney. There's a matter regarding the will. We need to see you in person. Tomorrow, if possible. I paused in the parking lot, half in the car, half out. I wasn't told I was part of any inheritance. Shelley hesitated. That's precisely why we'd like to meet. The next day, I stepped into the sleek glass building in Midtown with zero expectations and one solid boundary. I wasn't going to let another family document take a piece of me. But as Shelley slid a manila envelope across the lacquered table and motioned for me to open it, I felt a familiar rush of unease. Inside were three things: a handwritten letter addressed to me, a sealed envelope marked Rowan, and a photocopy of a codicil dated 3 years prior to my father's passing, one no one in the family had apparently seen. Shelley leaned forward. This addition to the will was filed privately. It names you as beneficiary to a trust and legal owner of a coastal property in Maine. Your father left instructions to release this only upon your brother's attempt to liquidate the estate. I blinked. He tried to cut me out. My father? She smiled gently. No, Olivia. He tried to protect you. I opened the letter. It wasn't long, but every word hit with the weight of silence now broken. Olivia, if you're reading this, then I failed to say what I should have while I was alive. I made mistakes, especially when it came to trusting your brother with what he hadn't earned. But I never stopped seeing you, in the way you raised Rowan, in the life you built without applause. I couldn't undo the harm caused, but I could give you back something no one could take. The land is yours. Use it however you see fit. The trust is for Rowan. This isn't a reward, it's an acknowledgement. Dad. My breath caught. Back at home, Rowan found me at the dining table, letter trembling in my hand. Did someone write you a story? He asked. Something like that, I said. The next week I drove to Maine. The property was nothing like the opulent estate Daniel was so proud of. It was a weathered house nestled among pine trees, with a view of the ocean that didn't need a filter. The porch creaked. The garden had been left wild, but it was ours. And as Rowan ran barefoot in the grass, wind tugging at his hoodie, I felt something I hadn't in years. Anchored. Later that month, the family tried to contest the will. Daniel called, fuming. He was confused, Liv. He didn't understand how trusts work. He understood just fine, I said. He just didn't believe you would. Our mother followed up with a voicemail that veered between pleading and performative. I didn't respond. I had no interest in re-entering a stage I never auditioned for. Instead, I spent the following days filing the deed transfer, walking the bluff trail at sunset, and watching Rowan sleep more peacefully than he had in months. The trust wasn't enormous, but it was enough to start a college fund, pay off my debts, and finally say yes to a few things without guilt. More than money, it felt like proof that my father had seen me, that silence hadn't meant absence. The irony, of course, was that Daniel had spent years chasing legacy while I inherited it quietly, not with fanfare, with truth. And the more I thought about it, the more I understood what healing really meant. It wasn't about fixing things, it was about growing stronger in the places they once broke you. The invitation came in a navy envelope with a gold foil crest, my family's company logo embossed at the top like it still meant something to me. Inside was a single card, clean font, minimalist design, and 4 words that landed heavier than they should have. Board meeting and vision retreat. I turned it over, handwritten in Daniel's all-too-familiar slanted scrawl, "Let's rebuild together. Your name still carries weight." I stared at those words for a long time, letting the irony of it burn through me. When they disowned me over a loan, my name was a liability. Now that my father's trust and property had shifted public perception, suddenly I had value again. The meeting was being held at the Ridgewood Lodge, an upscale mountain retreat where the board used to meet back when my father still had influence and dignity. It was a place where deals were made over bourbon and bonfires, where Daniel once bragged that legacies weren't inherited, they were curated. I had no intention of going, not at first. But then Rowan asked, "Mom, are they scared of you now?" I smiled. "I don't think they know what to feel yet." "Then maybe it's time they find out." So I packed one suitcase, booked a room separate from the event block, and drove the 4 hours to Ridgewood with a calm I didn't recognize in myself. Not bitterness, not revenge, just clarity. The lodge hadn't changed much. Stone pillars, dark walnut beams, the kind of decor that tried to scream legacy but whispered entitlement. I walked through the lobby, eyes following me like echoes of a ghost they thought they buried. Inside the boardroom, Daniel rose as I entered. "Olivia, I'm glad you came." I nodded, taking the seat at the far end of the table, not the one he had pulled out for me next to him. "We'd like to discuss a new direction for the company. Diversification, family inclusion, stronger brand integrity." I let him speak, watched the way the others deferred to his voice, but there was an edge of hesitation now, like they were waiting to see which way the wind would shift. When he finally paused, I met his eyes. "You don't want inclusion, Daniel. You want insulation. You think if I sit at this table again, people will forget what you did to your nephew." His jaw tensed. "That's not fair." "What's not fair is that Rowan still asks why Grandma never called to say sorry. What's not fair is that you let pride cost you both family and reputation. Dad left you land, he left you that trust. Isn't that enough?" "It's not about enough. It's about truth. And here's mine. I didn't come back to do business. I came to make sure you don't rewrite the story again." There was silence. One board member finally asked, "So why accept the invitation at all?" I stood, smoothing my coat. "Because this legacy doesn't belong to just one bloodline anymore. It belongs to truth-tellers. To the ones who build something real and don't abandon it when it cries at midnight." Before I left, I slid a folder onto the table, documents outlining my formal exit from all legal claims to the family company. I didn't want the seat. I wanted the freedom of never needing it. Outside, the air was crisp, fresh pine, melted snow. I called Rowan from the parking lot. "Did you win, Mom?" he asked. "I didn't play. I just walked away louder than they expected." Back in Maine that evening, I lit a fire in the hearth and pulled out the deed to the coastal house. I placed it in a frame above the mantel, not as a trophy, but as a reminder. Sometimes legacy isn't the business you inherit, it's the boundary you enforce. The coastal house sat on a rocky cliff in Kennebunkport, Maine, its shutters rattling in the salty wind, like it still hadn't decided if it was proud to stand alone or just tired from years of weathering storms. I hadn't changed much in the structure since I moved in, save for replacing the drafty windows and fixing the sag in the porch step that Rowan kept tripping over. But the spirit of the house, the echo it carried when we laughed, the quiet when we wept, that felt like mine. After the boardroom, I spent the next few weeks doing something I hadn't done in a long time, living without bracing for impact. I planted tulips along the fence line, taught Rowan how to roast marshmallows over a fire pit, and hosted dinners for friends who asked nothing of me but honesty and presence. It was during one of those dinners that Sarah, an old colleague who'd left corporate life to become a grief counselor, leaned over the table and said, "This house feels like a place where things get sorted. Not just physically, soulfully." She was right. The house had become more than a safe place. It had become a reflection of the healing I didn't know I was brave enough to begin. Each room had a memory that no longer haunted. The guest bedroom, where I once cried holding Rowan after the abandonment, now held spare linens and sea glass bowls. The kitchen, once silent and dim, now danced with music while we cooked. The hallway, which I'd once walked like a ghost, now framed Rowan's drawings in wooden borders he helped me sand and stain. I didn't just fix the house, I let it fix me. One afternoon, while reorganizing the upstairs closet, I found an old box tucked behind a loose floorboard. Inside was a notebook, my father's. Not the public man's notebook, full of figures and strategy, but something different. It was filled with sketches of this house, notes in the margins about sunrise angles, insulation choices, and a paragraph I read 3 times before the words finally stuck. I built this place in hopes my daughter would one day claim it, not because I asked, but because she believed she could. I may not say it aloud, but I see in her the grit I never had the courage to live out loud. I sat on the floor with that notebook in my lap for what felt like hours, the tide outside rolling in and out like it knew how to wait for me. My father had made mistakes, but somewhere in his quiet, there was a truth I hadn't let myself acknowledge. He saw me, even when the others didn't. That night, I placed the notebook in a shadow box and hung it above the mantel beside the deed. Legacy isn't what's written in a will, it's what's whispered in the walls. As autumn crept in, Rowan and I began hosting weekend storytelling nights, inviting neighbors, friends, even the occasional traveler staying at a local inn. People sat on picnic blankets, wrapped in fleece, sipping cider while they took turns sharing stories. Some were funny, others broke open the dark and showed what healing could sound like when spoken aloud. It wasn't about performance, it was about connection. One night, after sharing a short story, I wrote about a woman reclaiming a stolen name. An older man approached me. "You turned pain into architecture," he said. "This house, these nights, they're not just healing you, they're anchoring everyone who steps in." I smiled. That was never the plan. Sometimes the best legacies are the ones we build when we stop following blueprints. And that's when I realized I didn't come here to rebuild what was lost. I came to create what never existed before. A space where healing didn't have to be whispered, where legacy wasn't a performance, where truth stood taller than shame. As Rowan fell asleep that night, curled beside me on the oversized couch in the sunroom, I looked out past the glass to the black Atlantic horizon. My name didn't need to be carved into company stone or branded on metal signage downtown. It was written here, in stories, in soil, in silence turned sacred. I wasn't just living in the house my father left me, I was finishing what he started. I used to think closure meant slamming a door, a dramatic exit, a final word. But now, sitting with a pen in my hand and Rowan fast asleep in the next room, I know better. Closure isn't silence, it's speaking, finally, in your own voice. The invitation to speak at the Women's Leadership Summit came in late November. I almost deleted the email, but the subject line, "Your story matters," caught me. And the sender, Naomi Reyes. She'd been a junior analyst during my first year at Barton Strategy. Now she was running a consulting firm of her own, and this summit was her brainchild. She didn't want my resume, she wanted my story. Not the polished version either, the real one. I said yes. 2 weeks later, I stood backstage at the Sheraton Ballroom in downtown Boston, the hum of 200 voices spilling through the curtains. I wore a navy sheath dress and a pair of flats I could actually stand in. My notes were in my hand, but I didn't need them. Not really. I had been rehearsing this moment in my soul for years. When Naomi introduced me, a woman who turned personal upheaval into quiet triumph, I stepped out into the lights and felt the room pull back into stillness. "I'm Olivia Grant," I began. "And a few years ago I thought I had lost everything. My job, my parents, my sense of who I was. But the truth is, I lost only the illusion. What came next was mine." I spoke of the $30,000 ask, of the child left behind, of the silence from people who should have protected me, not punished me. I talked about starting over in a town where no one knew my name, about finding grace in sunrises and grit in bedtime stories. And then I spoke of the house. How many of you, I asked, have tried to make yourself smaller just to fit into rooms that were never built with you in mind? Hands went up, eyes welled. I stopped trying to belong in the narrative they gave me, I said, and I started writing my own. When the talk ended, there wasn't applause so much as a collective exhale. Women hugged, some cried, one whispered, "Thank you for saying it out loud." Afterward, Naomi found me in the hallway. "You changed the room," she said. "They didn't just hear you, they saw themselves in you." I thanked her. Then I asked for something I never thought I would want: a recording. I wanted Rowan to hear it one day, not now. He was still too young to understand the politics of family or the burden of silence, but someday, when questions arose, as they always do, I wanted him to hear my voice, steady and clear. The week after the summit, a local news station picked up the talk. Then a podcast. Then a blog post went viral. My inbox filled with messages from women and men who had carried the weight of similar betrayals and never knew where to set it down. One message stood out. It was from my mother, Olivia. I saw the talk. I didn't know. But that was the thing. She had known. Maybe not all the details, but enough. I didn't respond. Closure, I was learning, didn't require a confrontation. It didn't need a round table of apologies or a perfectly worded letter. It needed truth, owned, spoken, and set down like a stone path leading away from fire. I printed the transcript of my talk and framed it beside Rowan's latest drawing, a lopsided sun over a too-blue ocean. He titled it, "Our Forever House." One morning he asked, "Mama, why do people say you're brave?" I smiled, because I told the truth, even when it hurt. He thought about that, then nodded like it made perfect sense. In the spring, I started writing again, not just journals and letters, but a memoir. Naomi's publishing imprint offered a deal, but more than that, they offered freedom. I called it What I Carried Out, because survival isn't just about what you escape. It's about what you choose to carry forward, and I was finally, fully choosing. What struck me most in this final chapter wasn't the applause, the viral blog, or even the long-overdue message from Olivia's mother. It was Rowan's innocent question, "Mama, why do people say you're brave?" That single line, so quietly placed, carries the weight of the entire story. Because bravery isn't always about confrontation. It's about choosing to speak when silence is safer. Choosing to stand when sitting down would be easier. This is what made Olivia's arc so powerful. She didn't just reclaim her life, she rewrote the ending. She didn't wait for permission or apologies. She built her own platform, told her truth, and left the door open. Not for reconciliation, but for legacy. And maybe that's the deeper lesson here. Sometimes the most powerful revenge isn't loud. It's living well on your terms, with your voice finally unmuted. Olivia didn't just survive what was done to her. She transformed it into a house, a home, a stage, a book, a future. And that's the kind of ending that stays with you long after the credits roll. If this story touched you, subscribe to Revenge with Seren, because some revenge needs no knives, no screaming. Just one spotlight, one shining nameplate, and someone they once dismissed rising, brilliant and unshaken. See you in the next story.